All right, well, it is 2:02, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Abby Ivy, and I am the director of the Florida Student Success Center. And I would like to welcome you to this exciting professional development opportunity that we have for you today, A Time for Leadership, presented by Arthur Levine and Scott Van Pelt. And us at the center, we are just thrilled to be able to provide this opportunity for you today. For those of you from colleges that are in our Florida Pathways Institute cohort, this session will serve as a pre-institute session for the upcoming institute that will be happening in April. And we'll return to the themes discussed throughout today's event during that institute in April. But we are also really excited to be able to open this opportunity up to all 28 colleges and welcome everyone here today. And we are so grateful to our speakers, Dr. Levine and Mr. Van Pelt, who are truly distinguished scholars, and we're really grateful to them for taking the time to share their knowledge and expertise with the Florida college system today. And tell you a little bit more about our guest speakers. Arthur Levine is a distinguished scholar of higher education at New York University, and he is also President Emeritus of Teachers College at Columbia University and President Emeritus of the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation. He has also been a faculty member and chair of the Institute for Educational Management at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, president of Bradford College, and senior fellow at the Carnegie Foundation. And Scott Van Pelt is currently an associate director with the communication program at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. And he's held a variety of administrative and teaching positions over the past decade, including roles in the areas of academic advising, admissions, student life, instructional technology, and curriculum design. And together, they recently authored a book called The Great Upheaval: Higher Education's Past, Present, and Uncertain Future, which they will be discussing more today and you may be familiar with. And many of you may have also seen their recent article regarding the future of higher education that was published in Inside Higher Education, or Inside Higher Ed. So we are so honored again to have them join us today. I want to extend a thanks again to them for taking the time to be with us. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our guest speakers. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Abby. Thanks for your kind words. Good afternoon, everybody. We are really, really happy to be with you today. This is an extraordinary gathering. We have the leaders of 28 community colleges and state colleges in the state of Florida. That's an amazing group. I'm also real happy because this is the first opportunity Scott and I have had to present together. And finally, I'm really happy because I'm a refugee from the Northeast, now living in Florida. I am thrilled to be here this winter, though I still root for the Red Sox. Okay, so we're going to talk with you about the future of teaching and learning in Florida's community colleges and state colleges. We're going to talk to you for about 60 minutes. And I promise it's going to seem much longer. I ought to tell you about my final course evaluations at Teachers College. I had one from a student who said, if I had 20 minutes left to live, I would want to spend them in Arthur Levine's class. Because every minute with Arthur Levine feels like an hour. By those standards, we got like 2.5 days together. So here's what's going to happen. Scott and I are going to talk to you about what we learned from our study of the future of higher education. I'm going to tell you first why and how we carried out the study. Then Scott's going to discuss what we learned from that study. Then I'm going to conclude by talking about some of the implications for Florida's community colleges and state colleges. Okay, so let's get going. Look, there's been a long, heated, and unresolved debate about the future of higher education in a time in which our country is shifting from a national analog industrial economy to a global digital information economy. Now, only once before in US history have we ever experienced change of this magnitude or duration or speed. It was during the Industrial Revolution. And during that era, higher education was transformed. That's going to happen again, not only with higher education, but with every one of our social institutions, government, healthcare, finance, media, all of them. And the reason is they were all created for a different society, an analog industrial economy. And they don't work quite as well now. Some people think they're broken. They don't fit into, they haven't yet refitted themselves for a digital knowledge economy. And that's what we're going to experience in the years ahead. So look, what's the impact going to be? We have three simultaneous revolutions going on in higher education. The first is demographic, the second is economic, and the third is technological. Now, some say, look, they're not a big deal. What we'll be able to do is adapt to all those changes by means of piecemeal reforms. Others say the changes are so large, so massive, that the current model of higher education is going to be replaced. Scott and I did this research to discover who was right. We thought the previous analyses were really unequal to the task. And we thought a three-pronged approach is what was necessary. And they involved looking backward. And that's a historical look. Let's go back. What happened last time higher education was transformed? Well, the transformation involved 7 steps. The first was broad criticism of higher education by government, media, the public. Cost was too high. It wasn't relevant to the current era. That was followed by denial by institutions. Then we witnessed experimentation, new kinds of programs, new kinds of possibilities. And finally, some models emerged. Cornell University emerged as a land-grant college. MIT in terms of industrial technology. Johns Hopkins in terms of research. And Joliet Junior College in terms of the oncoming community colleges. Then what happened was all those models disseminated to mainstream higher education. And what was left was like the wild, wild west. Everybody tried everything differently. So we tried to standardize it. And what we did was we created, a common accounting systems. And that was the credit system. And we created accreditation. We brought a sheriff in to measure what people were doing. And then we consolidated and scaled up. Where we are today is somewhere between stage 3 and stage 4. We're doing a lot of experimentation and we're beginning to see some models. And we also said, you got to look forward. You got to look and project forward the demographic sea change, the emerging knowledge economy, and the technological revolution. Demographics are different in every part of the country. Florida's are fascinating with the Hispanic growth of population in the state. One of the big issues is going to be, for all the colleges in the state, the declining enrollment of Hispanics in higher education years ahead. The economy is going to be new jobs, new ed requirements. It's going to require new skill sets. However, those 2 changes we're going to be able to adapt to. They're not going to fundamentally change higher education. Technology is the wild card. It has 5 big pieces: the internet, digital devices. They're going to be followed by big data, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality and augmented reality. Look, we've gone through the first 2. We've gone through the internet, we've gone through digital devices, and we've been able to adapt. The third one's really the question. That could be disruptive, and we don't know the answer yet. When we looked the third way, that gave some indication of what we might expect. And that was looking sideways. We studied other knowledge industries, film, newspapers, music, and they all face the same three challenges that we did: demographic, economic, technological. But they responded far more quickly. And that's related to the nature of the beast. Not-for-profits respond slowly by reform, by trying to change what already exists. For-profits change by replacing what exists. And what they went through is a period in which they faced the new demographics, the new knowledge economy, all kinds of regulation, new kinds of technological developments. And you know, throughout most of the industrial era, they did fine with it. They were able to adapt. And then came digital technology. And what it did was disrupt all three industries. So I'm going to turn to Scott. Hey, Scott, what did we learn?
Oh, just a few things, Arthur.
Okay, back to me.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Van Pelt, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with you all today. First, I'd like to echo Arthur's gratitude for the invitation to participate in this pre-institute session. Now, as Arthur mentioned, our analysis included a look backward at the history of higher education in the United States, a look sideways at other industries that have already experienced disruption, and a look forward at the realities confronting higher education today. All my time with you here this afternoon, I'd like to share what those realities are and how we expect them to transform higher education. I'll then pass the digital microphone right on back over to Arthur to discuss what those in the higher ed community can do in response to those realities. When Arthur and I completed our exploration backwards, sideways, and forwards, we found ourselves with four clear realities facing higher ed. First, the ongoing proliferation of new producers and distributors. Second, the demand for anytime, any place education. Third, the rise of just-in-time education. And fourth, a shift from inputs to outcomes. Now, let me start by saying these realities are not years off. They're not hiding out somewhere on the horizon. They're playing out right now at colleges, universities, ed tech startups, and non-traditional education providers in countless ways across the country. And if there's one message I hope I can leave you with in the next half hour or so, it's that the challenges and opportunities that these realities entail are of critical interest to every educator, every administrator, every campus leader, and every policymaker working in higher ed today. So let me take you through them. The first reality is the ongoing proliferation of new producers and distributors. In recent years, higher education has become a rather crowded space. Areas that we typically considered the domain of traditional higher education institutions, our universities, 2- and 4-year colleges, they're now being tapped by non-traditional providers. Let me give you some examples. I'm sure that we all know of Coursera. Founded in 2012, it was built as a platform to provide anywhere, anytime access to world-class education. Well, 5 years ago, Coursera registered about 28 million learners. As of last year, that figure had grown to 92 million, with 17 million of those coming from the United States. To put that into context, that last figure is nearly equal to the full-time undergraduate enrollment in the United States. Amidst a global pandemic that forced learners to dramatically reevaluate the ways in which they engage with learning experiences, the platform saw a nearly 30% increase in registered learners between 2020 and 2021. Similar platforms like edX have continued to see similar year-over-year growth. Now, new entrants include not only distribution platforms, but new education providers as well. Google now offers certifications in IT support, data analytics, project management, and more. Their certifications are completely online, self-paced, and cost only $49 for each month of study. Now, Google estimates that most students should complete a certificate within about 6 months of study, after which they can pursue employment with any one of the 150 employers that Google has partnered with to hire certificate earners. The past several years have also seen the emergence of boot camps aimed specifically at training future coders and developers. And while these aren't cheap, coming in at an average of $14,000, they offer something that's attractive to many learners, a quick on-ramp to well-paying jobs. So it's not surprising then that the boot camp enrollments have increased tenfold since 2013. Now, of course, competition for vocationally oriented programs isn't necessarily new in higher ed. We've seen that happen time and time again, but non-traditional providers aren't stopping there. The American Natural History Museum offers a PhD in comparative biology, as well as a Master of Arts in Teaching. Not to be outdone, the Museum of Modern Art through Coursera offers courses and certificates in subjects like contemporary art and post-war abstract painting. Meanwhile, PBS, through its Teacher Line program, is the single largest source of professional development for K-12 educators in the US today. Now, there are common themes across these providers. First and foremost, they offer flexibility. In many cases, learners can enroll in a course or a program on demand, and they can access learning content 24/7 from wherever they are on whatever device they happen to have handy. These programs are frequently low cost. And in many cases, such as in the case of Google, organizations offering these opportunities are considered leaders in their field or industry. And while there are differences in the student demographics from one provider to the next, many entrants are pursuing the new majority of learners. Learners who are older, seeking part-time study, and who may not yet have a college degree. In the case of Google, the majority of those pursuing the IT support certificate, for example, don't have a college degree. And here's the thing. Google has said that for their own hiring purposes, they'll consider these certifications to be equal to a college degree. Here's the bottom line. The entrance of non-traditional providers into the educational space has accelerated, and based on enrollments and registrations, this trend shows no signs of slowing down or stopping. During a period in which enrollments at traditional 2- and 4-year colleges have declined, in the case of the Florida college system, I'm sure you're all aware, a 5.5% decline last year, Coursera added millions of new learners, and providers like Google and Microsoft have continued to expand their offerings. As traditional higher education providers face an already troubling demographic picture, competition, especially for learners who are older, part-time, and from traditionally underrepresented backgrounds, will only increase. The second reality we looked at is the demand for anytime, anyplace education. In our exploration sideways, looking specifically at the music, movie, and newspaper industries for useful parallels, Arthur and I found some common themes. When given the choice, consumers across all of these spaces generally choose on-demand access over fixed time access. They choose universal, typically mobile access over fixed locations. They choose unbundled services and products rather than sticking with the bundles that industry has traditionally defined for them. And lastly, they frequently choose low-cost over high-cost options. We look at higher ed today and we see the same trend unfolding. To understand why that is, we need to consider our students and the ways in which they've changed. The digital natives seeking educational opportunities today tend to express a preference for anytime, anyplace education. And for the new majority of learners, older adults, especially working adults attending programs part-time, there are certain things they're looking for from their educational experiences. They're seeking convenience, they're seeking quality, affordability, and choice in what they pay for. Those learners whom we once called non-traditional and now call the new majority, they're not interested in paying for facilities or services that they don't make use of. They're pulling away from campus life. At two-year schools in particular, this sentiment isn't all that uncommon, with fewer than half of students nationwide reporting that they'd ever attended a campus-based social event. The lives of these learners are increasingly busy, pulled in different directions by work obligations, family needs, and so much more. For these learners, flexibility is paramount. And when we consider the lives and needs of these students, the rise of alternative providers that I described just a few moments ago isn't all that surprising. Learners are seeking options to improve their lives through education, but those options need to fit within often already demanding schedules. One useful takeaway here is that higher education doesn't exist in a vacuum. Increasingly, learners are looking at their experiences within traditional higher education institutions, and they're wondering why our enterprise operates so differently from almost every other sector with which they interact. Sectors like the music industry. 20 years ago, the average cost of a CD was $14. Flash forward to today, And you can pay roughly the same amount each month for everyone in your household to have 24/7 on-demand access to virtually every popular song ever recorded on just about any connected device with sound output. A comparable low-cost subscription-based approach has already taken root in education. It's one of the many models that are being experimented on right now. We see it playing out on Coursera. We're seeing it in new providers such as Straighterline, which offers ACE credit recommended college courses online for $99 a month. And we see it in LinkedIn Learning, which offers a catalog of over 15,000 courses for a monthly fee. It can be easy to assume that low cost is necessarily indicative of low quality, and that learners given the choice will always choose the higher quality option. But there's a warning from our look sideways that can be helpful here. If we step back a moment to the start of the 21st century, when MP3s were first created, there were experts in the music industry who thought it would never catch on. Common wisdom says that the audio quality of MP3s was and still is inferior to more traditional, high fidelity formats like vinyl. But what those experts didn't count on was the fact that most listeners aren't audiophiles. Consumers were willing to sacrifice some degree of quality if the exchange gave them unparalleled access and convenience. Now, I mention this not to advocate for low quality in education, but rather as a cautionary note. It would be dangerous to assume that learners will avoid non-traditional providers solely due to quality concerns. The educational experience at your local 2 or 4-year college may indeed be objectively better than what students would experience in any of these new providers. But if the new providers are offering a greater degree of flexibility, on-demand 24/7 access to educational content and other conveniences, quality concerns will weigh a bit less in their minds. To them, there may in fact be no perceivable loss in quality. Another theme that arose in our look sideways was that of unbundling. It's a theme that's played out especially clearly in the music and newspaper industries. Instead of purchasing an entire newspaper, consumers now share and access individual articles with an often high degree of agnosticism around where that content came from. Instead of purchasing an entire album, we stream individual tracks. The artificial buckets into which we've traditionally organized content and experiences are changing. They're not disappearing entirely, but we're seeing a significant shift in control, with consumers now having a much greater degree of choice in how things are bundled. In higher education, we have our own set of bundles. In some institutions, a typical bundle might include services and amenities that many students might never use. Another bundle, perhaps the most ubiquitous one in higher education, is the degree. Now, whether that's an associate's or a bachelor's degree, this bundle includes a series of courses that we've decided should be packaged together. But the same trend that led to the decline of the album in the daily newspaper is now making its way into higher ed, and learners are finding that they have more choice than they had before in how their learning is bundled. And to many learners, these new bundles can be very attractive. Shorter, more agile programs with learning objectives clearly mapped onto career outcomes are on the rise. Stackable credentials, which allow for an incremental, lossless journey to career advancement, are also gaining prominence. The benefit for learners is progress toward a credential with minimal wasted effort. When students of traditional institutions today seek to transfer between schools to complete their degree, they lose an average of 43% of their accumulated credits, nearly half of their progress, representing sometimes thousands of dollars of tuition wiped away, perhaps with no tangible benefit to show for it. Now, with that in mind, it's easy to see the appeal of any time, any place learning experiences that offer clear, stackable goals and outcomes. In short, new providers are tailoring their offerings around the lives of students, rather than having students tailor their lives to accommodate their local institution's offerings. They're doing so by providing access to learning in a way that mirrors what students experience in many other parts of their lives. Anywhere, anytime access with outcomes bundled in clear, understandable ways. The third reality that we examined is the rise of just-in-time education. Now, for most of its history, higher ed has been based on what we call a just-in-case model. Students attend classes, achieve learning outcomes, earn a degree, and aspire to find somewhere to apply that learning after graduation. This model still has its place, but it will be eclipsed by another model, a just-in-time approach to learning. In this model, students will seek out short-term agile learning experiences that provide skills and knowledge that they can apply immediately. And they'll do so not just once at the start of their careers, but rather regularly on an as-needed basis as the skills that they need to succeed professionally evolve over time. Let me unpack that a bit. To understand why we project a shift to just-in-time education, we need to explore the two forces that are driving demand for it. The first is the declining half-life of knowledge, and the second is the impact of automation on job skills. The American Society of Training and Documentation has noted that, and I quote here, half of what is known today was not known 10 years ago. The amount of knowledge in the world is doubling every 18 months. And here's the scary part about that quote. It's 20 years old now. The rate of change is far faster by now. In one projection that specifically considered the field of medicine today, researchers estimated that the current time it takes for knowledge to double is down to just 73 days. In short, knowledge becomes obsolete more quickly than ever before, and our current education infrastructure isn't designed to react in kind. Automation is the second driver here. As much as half of time spent on current job tasks could be automated in the next 20 years. In particular, jobs sometimes described as being low skill are particularly susceptible to automation, though fields as wide-ranging as law, medicine, and accounting will also be impacted. Here's what this means for higher education. First, flexibility in accessing educational opportunities will be crucial. When the half-life of knowledge declines by the day, learners aren't necessarily as interested in waiting until next fall or next spring to enroll in a program that might take a year or two to complete. As the half-life of knowledge shrinks, the time that it takes to access and complete educational experiences must also respond with similar speed. Automation will drive demand for flexible access for a very similar reason. As technological advances lead to some tasks, skills, or entire jobs becoming obsolete, learners will seek out educational programs that open new doors for them as quickly as possible. Second, partnerships with industry, local as well as larger employers, will be key to keeping a pulse on what skills and knowledge learners need to succeed. The content and outcomes associated with a given program will have a shorter shelf life, and they need to be revised and updated far more frequently than is common today. Third, our credentialing processes need to evolve. The traditional bundle in higher ed, the degree, quickly loses relevance when the body of knowledge for a given field might double several times over by the time a student achieves a 2 or 4 year degree. Instead, stackable micro-credentials that clearly describe what a learner has achieved and what they can do as a result of their learning will see more widespread implementation. Lastly, it's important to keep in mind that automation doesn't lead only to the obsolescence of skills. It also results in the demand for new skills, sometimes entirely new roles. The challenge is in ensuring that learners, particularly those whose opportunities may have diminished as a result of automation, have the skills and knowledge needed to take advantage of these new roles when they emerge. This need will drive a surge in lifelong learning as adults seek to upskill or reskill throughout their entire lives. The new demographics of higher ed will increasingly include older learners, learners who are working full-time or perhaps between roles, and learners with families. The kinds of support that they'll need will look different from what we tend to offer today. This is true too for the kinds of educational experiences that they'll be seeking. Learners will look for programs that meet them where they are when they need it. Flexible, frequent entry points, perhaps to the point of on-demand access, will be critical. The fourth and final reality is perhaps the most significant in that it underpins every other development that we've explored. It's the shift from inputs to outcomes. Our current higher ed system was built for an industrial society. In response to that last great upheaval, the Industrial Revolution, a multitude of models and organizations emerged, like the ones Arthur mentioned: research universities, land-grant colleges, technical schools, and two-year colleges. The credit hour emerged during this time. It's a system that's rooted in seat time, credits, courses, and semesters. In short, it's a time-based accounting system. And that system served us well for over a century. But the world that this system was built for is giving way to a new one, a knowledge-based economy which is rooted in outcomes. This new world is agnostic about the time or process by which outcomes are achieved. We're headed toward a system of education that emphasizes learning outcomes and competencies. The industrial era model of higher ed, focusing on timed process teaching, this will be eclipsed by a knowledge economy successor rooted in outcomes and learning. Now, we see this transformation occurring in three ways. First, how teaching and learning proceed. Second, how outcomes are represented. And third, how providers are held accountable. First, a shift in focus to outcomes will require new innovative approaches to how we educate students. Despite decades of research, best practices from the learning sciences have yet to make their way into many traditional classrooms. In 2018, researchers from the University of Lincoln, Nebraska, conducted an observational study of over 2,000 college STEM classes. But what they found was that over half of classroom interactions across all of those classes consisted solely of conventional lecturing. Fewer than a fifth of classroom interactions emphasized student-centered practices such as discussions and group work, despite the fact that we know these practices lend themselves to stronger learning outcomes. In another more recent study from the Education Division of Barnes & Noble, faculty were asked whether they felt that they understood how the current generation learns. Well, 82% of them agreed. I would. But when students were asked whether they felt their professors understood how their generation learns, only half of the students agreed. So we have misalignment. We have misalignment between what we know supports student learning and what actually occurs in the classroom. And we have misalignment between student and instructor perceptions of how meaningful learning occurs. To address this, institutions and other education providers need to rethink how we approach student learning, with the acknowledgement that to truly drive achievement of learning outcomes, it takes a village. To date, teaching and learning has primarily been the domain of subject matter experts, instructors and faculty who have experience and expertise in their field. Now, that expertise has been and will remain central to the design of fruitful learning environments. Looking ahead, though, we'll also need new kinds of expertise to augment design and delivery of tomorrow's learning experiences. Learning design will become an increasingly collaborative process involving experts in the learning sciences who can share evidence-based practices to drive student learning. It'll involve instructional designers whose understanding of the ways in which technology can support learning will be critical. And it will involve more data-driven roles, as the technology that supports student learning increasingly makes use of adaptive algorithms to provide personalized, individual support to students on their learning journeys. Already, we've seen experiments with adaptive learning systems play out at all kinds of providers across the country, including some of the institutions in the Florida college system, like Broward College. In some, the role of the instructor will be reimagined. In some models, the role may become unbundled, with various experts, educators, and professionals partnering on the design and delivery of learning experiences, more so than in even the most collaborative environments out there today. In other models, we may see a surge in demand for a unique kind of educator, those who can achieve mastery not only of subject matter, but also of andragogy and educational technology. Now, these experts, who will likely come from the current ranks of part-time and adjunct instructors as well as full-time faculty, could become the new triple threats, to borrow a theater and sports metaphor, with a corresponding increase in demand for that unique set of skills. New approaches to teaching and learning will also need to recognize a fundamental truth about our learners, specifically that students learn at their own pace. In the industrial model of education that's dominated for the past century and a half, time has been a constant. Our students attend classes for the same number of hours. They complete assignments along shared timeframes. The end result is that inputs such as time are a constant, while student outcomes are highly variable. Now, that's starting to change, and the new models that we see emerging increasingly emphasize self-paced educational experiences. The goal? A system in which we flip the paradigm. Time now becomes a variable in flux, and the achievement of learning outcomes becomes constant. Now, this shift, admittedly, is a lot easier described than it is accomplished. Our systems of accounting in higher education are all time-based. For everything from calculation of financial aid awards to the tracking of student progress, we rely on well-established measures like credit hours and semesters. In this, new entrants to higher education have an advantage in that they are, by design, less dependent on these familiar units. For traditional institutions, facilitating this pivot will be one of the most Herculean tasks that we face. Shifting our approaches to teaching and learning to emphasize outcomes is a necessary but on its own insufficient change. We also have to address the ways in which those outcomes are represented. When students finish an educational program today, they often get very little of use that provides evidence of what they learned or accomplished, and that can do a disservice not only to the student, but to consumers of those credentials. Take the standard college transcript, for example. There are abbreviations that might only make sense to the school's registrar, course titles that might be cut off, and grades that don't convey all that much, if anything at all, about what a student knows or can do as a result of their learning. Similarly, the standard diploma has, I quote Kevin Carey here, roughly the same amount of information that prisoners of war are required to divulge under the Geneva Conventions. Now, in fairness, traditional transcripts and diplomas are themselves artifacts of this passing age, and they weren't designed to communicate the kinds of information that I'm describing here. But the need is clear. So it isn't surprising that new entrants to the education space include not only providers and distributors of educational content, but also companies like Credly, Badger, and Parchment, exploring new ways of capturing, describing, and sharing learning outcomes via digital credentials. The revolution is quietly underway with the emergence of new models that emphasize outcomes not only in the learning experience, but in the credentialing of learning as well. Ultimately, this gives more power to lifelong learners and could be far more useful to consumers of credentials like employers and other educational programs. Lastly, the shift from inputs to outcomes will change the ways in which education providers are held accountable. This will impact not only formal accountability processes such as accreditation, but also the idea of consumer choice overall. When students are looking at colleges to choose from today, they have not all that much in the way of useful data to base their choice on. For a certain segment of the population, prestige and rankings still dominate. For others, and this is especially true for learners who've pursued two-year degrees, choice is often a function of geography and proximity. But if we continue to see any time, any place models of higher ed emerge that emphasize achievement of outcomes, and if we have data on which programs are more successful in helping students reach those outcomes, then we'd see a greater focus, I think, on educational quality in students' decision-making processes, an actual focus on learning and the actual achievement of outcomes. This shift in how we think about accountability also has implications for equity, a topic that is front and center in the public consciousness today, not only in higher ed. In recent decades especially, an incredible amount of work has gone toward promoting equal access to opportunity in higher education, an effort that's often involved taking 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. The pandemic has only amplified the challenge. 6 months into the pandemic, ACE President Ted Mitchell warned that its effects risked undoing 20 years of gains in access for first-generation and minority students. About a year and a half later, and his fears unfortunately seem to have been justified. In California, for example, nearly half of the decline in state community college enrollments over the past year was due to Hispanic students withdrawing from higher education as financial pressures, family obligations, and technological challenges created a rather imperfect storm. College systems around the country reported similar trends. Yet even amidst these setbacks, the great upheaval that Arthur and I describe will require an evolution of this effort and a new definition of equity. In this global knowledge economy, equity takes on a new meaning, ensuring equal access not only to the same opportunities, but to the same learning outcomes, providing students with the differential resources they need to achieve the same result. I'll close out my comments on this fourth reality with a personal observation. In my professional life, I hold a staff role as well as an appointment as a part-time lecturer in the communication program at the University of Pennsylvania. I also support a cohort of dedicated part-time instructors who teach our curriculum to about 1,000 students every year. Like I'm sure many of you do, I spend a great deal of time thinking about how I teach, thinking about what my students learn, and how I'm empowering them to speak about their skills and knowledge once our time together is finished. When I think about this new reality, there are parts of it about which I'm very excited as an educator. For example, I do believe that well-defined, clearly represented outcomes serve to benefit learners. And I feel too that emerging technologies, including adaptive learning, VR and AR, digital badges, and more, can indeed support effective learning environments. But I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't see any cause for concern. Over the past 30 minutes or so, I've described a number of emerging trends and models, many of which depend on access to technology. Well, the pandemic has exposed and exacerbated something that we already knew. There's a significant digital divide, both nationally and globally. In the US today, there are significant gaps in desktop computer access and broadband internet access across racial and ethnic groups, with Black and Hispanic Americans especially having lower rates of access. As of last year, 80% of white Americans have had broadband access. For Black Americans, it's 9 points lower, and 15 points lower for Hispanic Americans. This gap is worrying. And in states that have high proportions of Black and Hispanic Americans, like Florida, a state in which the population growth among Hispanics will account for half of the state's total population growth over the next 30 years, we need to take special care to offer meaningful access to education and these new opportunities. In short, we have to take every action to ensure that we don't create new models that exclude already historically underrepresented populations. We can't replicate the mistakes of the past. Well, to close out this portion of our session before I toss it back to Arthur, I'll offer this. To see the future of higher education, we need only look at the present and recent past of many other sectors where these realities are already playing out. The implications of these changes necessitate a fierce re-examination of everything from how, when, and where learning proceeds, to how student progress is measured, to how organizations are held accountable for the outcomes that their students achieve or don't achieve. And even as institutions grapple with these very difficult questions, new providers will continue to enter the education space, increasing competition while providing useful experiments on which to build future models. There's one thing I can tell you with absolute certainty is that no institution will be immune to these realities. Every institution, small, large, 2-year, 4-year, public, private, all will be affected. And on that remarkably uplifting note, let me hand it back to Arthur to discuss what institutions can do in response to these realities.
Thank you, Scott. We don't think you can do anything about this, and we wish you luck. No, in all seriousness, I'm going to pick up where Scott left off and say that every institution is going to be affected, but not all in the same fashion. There are going to be 3 different outcomes. One is we're going to see some institutions close, and that's going to be especially true of low endowment, low selectivity schools in the Northeast, Midwest, Middle Atlantic states, where demographics are going to be terrible. It's only COVID federal subsidies that have delayed the closures. Second outcome is going to be adaptation. By the way, who was right? Those who said we'd adapt or those who said we'd be disrupted? They were both right. In terms of adaptation, the schools that are going to have the greatest chance of being able to adapt are those that are either very wealthy and can wait and watch and see what works, or institutions that have a value added. And what I mean by that is they provide more than simply an undergraduate education. An example would be a research university. What we need researchers. We need to train the next generation of researchers. We can't afford for them to go out of business. We probably have too many now. We can't afford for them to go out of business. So they'll continue. They'll be able to adapt. Another group is residential colleges. We have too many now. But the fact of the matter is that 20% of all college students live in residence, and that some are still going to want that experience. So some residential colleges will indeed be able to adapt. The third fate is disruption. And the institutions that are most likely to experience disruption are those that have high commuter populations, those with older students, those with low income students, those with first generation students, those with part-time attenders, those where students work full-time, those where students come to campus primarily to attend classes, especially if there's a long commute, those with fixed locations and fixed times, those with large and oversized classes, and even those in which parking is difficult to find. So the institutions that are most at risk of disruption are regional universities and community colleges. I want to say something before I go on, and that's that I really do have a confession to make. We have a confession to make. We don't like a lot of these findings. We walked into this agnostic about what we'd find. We weren't hoping to find anything in particular when we began the research. Scott and I are both products of traditional higher education. We spent our careers in traditional higher education. We fear that the changes are going to promote inequity in education. There's a real danger of creating two separate systems of education, two separate and unequal systems of education. One online, low cost, offering alternative credentials, and the other face-to-face, in which a quarter of the students are residential. That'd be wrong if we did that. And we also feel a loss of common learning. As education gets more individualized, what's common to all of us, the general education, those things that we all need to know if we want to live in a democratic society, are at risk. As students begin to take only those things that may be vocational. I'm going to offer 5 bits of counsel. I think the things we described can be mitigated, not for higher education, but for any particular institution. And here are the 5 pieces of counsel we'd offer you. 1, we can't plan on business as usual. You know, a lot of the leaders we spoke to in the course of the pandemic viewed the pandemic as an interruption, sort of like a hurricane, an earthquake, a forest fire. After they cleaned up, they thought their institutions would return to fall 2019. We can't do that. It's just not possible. We're really compelled to look forward rather than trying to see something in the past. COVID was an accelerator, not an interruption. What it did was it sped forward things that would have happened over a much longer time. The proliferation of new providers, online learning, some closures, just-in-time education. The pandemic revealed the world in the making. And one of the dangers as we visit institutions in recent times is the danger of magical thinking. That, oh yeah, I heard all that. It's not going to happen to us. It'll go away. There'll be some remedy. Another danger is the belief in institutional exceptionalism, which is our institution is different. It may happen to every other college in the state college system. Not going to happen to us. Another potential pitfall is short rather than long-term thinking. It's an environment in which quick fixes aren't likely to work very well. And there's also a sense sometimes that the failure of an innovation, and then you try something new and it doesn't work, can't be taken as an affirmation of current practice. Just because the fix you tried didn't work doesn't mean that what you have is what students want or what's most needed today. And the last one, this is the hardest one, it's campus politics. The divisions that exist, administrators, faculties, boards. And that's one that doesn't serve anybody. The reality is we're all facing the same problems. And if we succumb, we're all going to pay a hefty price for having done so. Okay, second piece of advice. Recognize that colleges and universities are in the teaching and learning business, not the campus, the degree, or the credit business. It's sort of like railroads thought they were in the railroad business. They weren't, they were in the transportation business. Movie. Okay, I'm gonna try that one again. I know I can do this. Movie studios thought they were in the theater and TV business. And what they did was they failed to see Netflix. We really need to ask, and I know it's not a good question to ask for those of us in academia. What business are we in? Business is a bad word in our world. But it's not the same as asking what business are we in now? It's essential to recognize that traditional methods of distribution, whether face-to-face, campus-based, time-fixed, could be liabilities in the future. That traditional products may be outdated, semesters, credits, and consumer. I don't like that word. Let's call them students. Student tastes are changing, and they're asking for different things. Third, know tomorrow won't be a repeat of yesterday. I think about that great academic who offered some wonderful advice, Wayne Gretzky. And what he said was, skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it is. What's it mean? It means we have to continually monitor the world we live in. Who are our competitors? Not just the other colleges and universities our students might go to, but all the other post-secondary options. We got to keep looking at the demographics. Who's there? In a country and in a state in which our population's aging, is coming from abroad, it's changing racially, and it's moving. More and more people coming to the state. Job market, which is changing. The 2008-2009 recession dramatically changed the nature of jobs that are out there. 90% of new jobs created since then require post-secondary education. Fourth, restore the connection with the street. And here's what I mean. Higher education is most successful when we have one foot in the library, the collected wisdom of humankind, and one foot in the street, the real world. When the world changes quickly, what happens is colleges and universities lose traction with the street. And we find that the real need today is to restore that connection with the real world, with what's changing around us so very, very quickly. It means we have to update and modernize programs. A good example is general education. On most campuses, Gen Ed is a series of courses, a distribution requirement that we take in different departments. The reality is, general education's always changed throughout history. There are a new set of 21st century skills that all students need if they're going to be able to live and work in this world. The skills that they need to live in a changing world and be able to adapt rapidly, and the skills they need for a world that's growing digital, that's becoming more diverse, in which jobs are becoming horizontal more than vertical, and so on. We're going to have to eliminate studies in buggy whips. Students don't want them. and they don't help them. Internships, career counseling, you know all about that. But we need up-to-date technology, and we need partnerships with business. Maybe the best example I can think of is, not long ago, I visited a community college, and they'd just gotten a new piece of technology from one of the firms in their area. And they were really happy. They shouldn't have been. What it meant was, yesterday, they were teaching on a piece of machinery, technology, that was 3 generations old. Now they're teaching on a piece of technology that's a generation old. And that the reason business gave that to them was because it was no longer useful. We need partnerships with industry. We can't possibly keep up with all the technology that's coming out. We need to work with industry, take advantage of what they have. Last one. Make institutions distinctive. Give them a value added that distinguishes them from peers. Don't throw a lot of different solutions at the wall. It doesn't work. What I want to say for regional colleges, for community colleges, in 1905, the University of Wisconsin introduced a new concept. It was called the Wisconsin idea. And what they said was, the campus of the University of Wisconsin are the borders of the state of Wisconsin. The same thing's true of every regional college and every community college. It's the region, it's the community. For colleges to truly thrive in the environment we're talking about today, why shouldn't they go to Coursera rather than coming to your institution? We need to be local and inextricably intertwined into the world, our community, our region. We need to service employers with up-to-date, jointly constructed programs tied to needs of industry. We need to go to places. We need to be the go-to place for upskilling and reskilling. We need to provide the services, facilities, and expertise that the community needs. We need to be a lab for innovation. What's coming? How should the community respond? For students, we need to offer the programs and services that they need to be able to thrive in the world in which they live. We need to be thinking about service certifications. We need to be the center for just-in-time learning. If we can do those things, we are indispensable to our communities and our regions. The years ahead are going to bring extraordinary change. And you're the people who have the responsibility of building tomorrow for your institution. It's really a daunting challenge, but it's also an extraordinary opportunity. No generation in modern memory has had a chance to build the community colleges and state colleges tomorrow requires. None. I can't imagine the future of the state community and college system in better hands than yours. I wish you enormous success. We wish you enormous success because tomorrow depends upon it. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Arthur and Scott. That certainly, I'm sure, gave us so much to think about. I know the wheels are turning in my head. And I know you were very gracious in offering up some time for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put those in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I will call on you. I see there's already some thanks in the chat about how wonderful this was. I certainly agree. I want to thank you again.
Yeah, but Scott and I wrote all those.
And then for those who do need to hop off, I'm going to put a survey in the chat, a link to a survey if you wouldn't mind filling that out. But otherwise, please feel free to ask your questions. So one question that's in the chat from Melissa Perry is, what is the main takeaway that you would like the folks on this webinar to have?
Do you want it, Scott, or should I take it?
How about I offer one, and then if you'd like to give your perspective, we can do a 2-for-1 deal. How about that?
You got it.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway is thinking about these 4 realities and how they can be applied in your locality or in your institution. And I'll bring them up just one more time so we can all take a look at them. But when we're thinking about the ongoing proliferation of new producers and distributors, what does this mean for us? To go back to what Arthur said, what is the unique value add that we're bringing to the table that enables us to compete against this cacophony of providers? The demand for any time, any place education. How is that something that we can accomplish within our own curricula? The rise of just-in-time education, a very similar idea. And then lastly, and I'll reiterate that I really do feel this is the most critical one because it's so central to everything else that we talked about, this pivot from inputs to outcomes. As an educator, I know that many of us consider this on a course level or perhaps even a program level when we're designing. But we need to think bigger in terms of outcomes on an institutional level, looking at it in terms of how learning is credentialed and certified as well, how student progress is tracked, the kinds of ways that we're empowering students to talk about what they can do as a result of their learning. And if you can leave thinking about what these 4 realities mean for your institution and for the work that you do, I think that's a wonderful thing to walk away with and continue to consider over the next few months.
And I'd add only this, which is 3 points stand out for me. 1, enormous changes are coming. 2, community colleges and regional institutions are the most likely institution at risk of disruption. And 3, the power is in your hands to be able to meet the challenges that are ahead and make the changes that your institution requires in order to better serve the future.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat from Kevin Yee, and it is MOOCs and other new providers often do not incorporate the lessons of learning science that Scott mentioned. Clearly, colleges have a chance to do better with that integration, but how to navigate the optics of these choices. Students may choose what's easy, i.e. the MOOCs, even if it's not what's effective. So how do we market this effectively?
And what I'd say is, during the pandemic, one of the biggest providers of online learning is University of Southern New Hampshire. And while we were trying to figure out, oh my God, how do we take what we're doing now and put it online? They were trying to figure out what the next generation looks like. How do we support students who are online? How do we give them the services, the skills that they need? How do we make learning, bring it to the next generation, in which what we can actually do is individualize the learning, in which we can tell students how they're moving. How do we create a GPS for learning so that we can tell students how they're progressing, what the problems are in real time? That's what they were doing. The MOOCs are not sitting on their hands. A lot of them are busily trying to add the ingredients we need to add. And the one thing we can't do is stay a step behind. If we really want to thrive in the years that come, we have to go to those issues immediately and begin to work on them before others do it better than we do.
Great, and we have another question in the chat. How do you think the accreditation process / credential process will respond to these new realities?
Do you want it or should I?
Well, Arthur, I think you may have spoken to some accreditors.
Yeah.
Recently, so I have a couple of thoughts, but let me leave it to you for.
Accreditation was created in the 19th century, early 20th century. And the reason was that higher education was so disordered. They couldn't even agree on how long a course was. They couldn't agree on how long a semester was. And so accreditation came along, and its goal was to provide some standardization to all of this, provide some minimum quality level that would be required to be able to, one, define these things, and two, to offer these things. And accreditation has kept that role, which is it standardizes. I testified before the Senate Higher Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee in Washington, and they were really angry at accreditors. The senators really wanted accreditation to change. They thought it was too burdensome. They thought it took too long, and it was too expensive. And all it did was provide cookie cutter for all colleges and universities. What's going to happen in the world Scott just described, and we report on in our book, is that if any provider, let me change that. If I can learn any subject in any way, I can learn it from a Florida community college or state college. I can learn it from Coursera. I can learn it in Wikipedia. I can learn it in a dream at night. It doesn't matter. All that matters is I'm competent to whatever it is, not how I learned it. What's going to happen is that we're going to see assessment and standardization of outcomes, not the provider of those outcomes. Some respects, what's going to be incumbent upon accreditors is to shift from a focus on institutions to a focus on learners and learning. I've been talking to a lot of accreditors about these issues lately. I'm talking to the heads of the 5 or 6 regionals at the end of this month, next month. They know there's a big problem. They just don't know how to answer it yet.
And while I might not have as many insights into what exactly that change will look like, I can tell you with absolute certainty that the pressure is there. I mean, I don't need to tell anyone in this space that from a value-added perspective, we look to accreditation to be a gatekeeper of federal funds for student aid. And we also look to accreditation because until recently, if you're applying to a job that requires a degree, it's not uncommon to see a line there that, this job requires an associate's or a bachelor's or something else from an accredited institution. Well, if we're getting into a world where low-cost options are more prevalent, the role of being a gatekeeper to student funding may diminish in importance. And if we are looking at a future in which employers have greater likelihood of buying in to innovative forms of credentials, badges, micro-credentials, other kinds of certifications, the paradigm starts to shift very quickly. And in my perspective, employer perceptions of credentials really represents the tipping point. Because once employers start to have greater buy-in to these new forms of credentials and outcomes and learning that we're talking about, things start to move very, very quickly. I almost picture it as dominoes falling. All of this time spent setting up this system, and with just that one piece, the entire thing starts to come down. And so I think they're very aware of that pressure. And when it happens, I think it will happen rather quickly.
Thank you. And I've received a couple of questions about the recording and if that will be available. Yes, I will send out a link to the recording by the end of the week. Any other questions? You can feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand and I can call on you if you'd like to unmute. Give it another moment for any lingering, burning questions.
And while we're waiting, Abby, if I could insert another resource and plug.
Absolutely.
We do have a resource online for the book at thegreatupheaval.com. I'll be happy to throw that link in chat. We've recently put that website together with our major findings and a way of getting in touch with Arthur and myself. Over the next few weeks, we'll continue to add to the content on that site. Currently, we're working on things like discussion guides and creating some kind of social community that will allow folks interested in this subject to connect on the topics mentioned in our book. So I'll go ahead and throw that in chat, and I welcome anyone to go ahead and take a look. And again, stay tuned for more. We'll continue to provide more resources and information in that space.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for putting that in the chat. And I see we have a hand raise. Luz Alvarez, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute.
Sure. Hi, how are you all
Hi.
doing? And I have a follow-up question for Scott's analogy of the dominoes and sort of the one domino kind of making everything else fall. What would be your recommendations for institutions as we are working with degrees that are traditional? And do you see that sort of traditional degree shifting or changing to accommodate for those micro-credentials within that degree so that it's an easier transition, perhaps?
I can start off and then toss it to you, Arthur. Thanks for the question. I think we've already, that's actually what we see playing out right now, is that those actors, those institutions that are trying to be one step ahead of things, they do find themselves working in more of a traditional paradigm, but working within those limits in creative ways. So figuring out ways of translating things like competencies into credit hours. This is sort of that adaptation approach that Arthur was talking about at the beginning. It's messy. It's playing out in different ways at every institution that's trying it. So that is what I see happening right now. And what I would expect is in this shift to a more outcome-oriented system where we see greater prevalence of micro-credentials and new forms of certifications. Those institutions that have been doing that work will have a leg up, even in all the messiness that's happening right now in terms of trying to translate these non-time-based measures into a time-based system.
I'd add one sentence.
Yeah.
You got to be bilingual in the new world. You got to be able to speak credits, and you got to be able to speak competencies.
Perfect. And one follow-up question, if I may. How do you see, you mentioned, sort of changing way in which students want to receive this education, where maybe traditional in the classroom is not the same. It's not sort of the way to go for everybody. We do know that there are people that need it, and I think it's important to keep it. But the variety that needs to be available to students and their request to have more availability of education and services that are hybrid, to say the least. How do you see that playing out in the near future?
Badly. And what's happening is, even before the pandemic, all of our health services were being overwhelmed by rising numbers of students coming with issues that required more time and were more serious. The pandemic has accelerated it. And I don't know how we balance all of that. I don't know how, within limited time and limited resources, we can provide the services that are needed. And that may be one of those things in which colleges need to partner more and more with social services than they've ever done before.
Thank you. We have a few more questions in the chat. How do you recommend starting the conversation at your institution?
I'll tell you what, I met with a group of, I'm going to be crass. And the question I was asked was, how do we get our faculty to act? And the answer I gave the presidents was, scare the hell out of them, tell them the truth, which is explain the conditions that we are facing today. We can't ignore them. The way to start the conversation is by laying out what's coming. And then once you've done that and created maybe some unfreezing in terms of people's values and beliefs, the next step is invite them to help plan the future with you. That's the best chance we have.
Just a couple of thoughts as well. In terms of finding that information that, to quote Arthur, scares the hell out of them, there's no shortage of it. It's coming out every day. I just read an article yesterday in the Hetchinger report around automation's impact on higher education. So the Southern Regional Education Board, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, they just updated their estimates on the rate of automation. The pandemic, according to them, has accelerated the rate of automation. And they're now predicting that 30% of current jobs could be automated by 2025. They just updated that. It was 2030. They've moved up the timeline by 5 years. So we can't afford to sit on our hands. As I said at the beginning, these realities, they're not on the horizon. They're happening right now. They're right around the corner. So I would leave it that there is a healthy amount of data out there that can illustrate the size and scope and magnitude of these issues that we've surfaced. And then, finding the one danger that I think it's important to be aware of around the pandemic and attitudes around online education. I've heard this from a number of college leaders. I've heard it, seen it in Inside Higher Ed. I've seen it in Chronicle, various authors saying this, a battle playing out around the idea of, well, do we know how to teach online or don't we? Look, we all had to do this in the pandemic. We clearly know how to do this now. And then, of course, we saw some research come out that showed that online learning in the pandemic wasn't all that effective for many people. We need to be very careful about the takeaways here. I could foresee some resistance to the idea that we need to move in these more innovative directions, because you might find people saying, hey, listen, we had this whole online thing, it didn't work out. Emergency online education is not the same as innovative, well-designed, thoughtfully created educational opportunities that incorporate technology. And I think we need to be clear in that distinction and be able to gently push back against individuals who might feel that, listen, we tried this, it didn't work, let's stick with what's worked in the past. Arthur couldn't have said it better. We cannot go back to business as usual.
Absolutely. Still more questions coming in the chat. One question is, what would both of you like to see change in the next 5 years?
I'd like Democrats and Republicans to be able to work together.
Let me see if I can come up with something more realistic. I think what I'd like to see, what I'm most hopeful about in all of this, and I'm speaking from the perspective of an educator here, is this shift to more outcomes-focused work. Again, it's something that I think a lot of educators include when they're coming up with their course, the design, they're coming up with their syllabus, but we really need to do a better job of making these outcomes explicit and clear for students and show them how these map onto career outcomes. I think that would be a wonderful development. I'd also like to see greater value associated with teaching. I did just catch this other question in the chat around the role of andragogy going, what's that role going to be with the new realities? I think teaching and the science of teaching is going to be central to everything that we're talking about here. Someone pointed out earlier that there are these new providers that have maybe at times, especially early on, done little more than offer content delivery. Well, content delivery alone is not education. Learning and education requires a multitude of tools, of which content delivery is only one small part. So another thing that I'd like to see, and in response to this question around the importance of teaching, is a greater value on the learning sciences. I think centers for teaching and learning, for example, will be absolutely critical to bringing these findings, these evidence-based findings into our classrooms, whether those are traditional classrooms or more innovative spaces like the ones we've been talking about over the course of the session today.
Great, and we have another question. What are your thoughts regarding the age profile of students in higher education? It is clear that there is a demographic shift, but will older individuals be our new traditional higher education students?
Yes. What I'd say is the new majority is going to be upskilling and reskilling. Not the student coming for a degree program. The only question that I think is out there is, does higher education want to do upskilling and reskilling? We're prepared to put together those programs, which require a great deal of agility and a great deal of ability to change in terms of subjects, fields, etc. If we don't do it, that new majority is going to go to other providers.
Thank you. I think that's all of the questions I see in the chat right now. I'll pause for a moment if there are any additional, and of course, again, you can raise your hand if you'd like to speak. We have a few minutes left. All right. I'm not seeing any additional questions. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank you both again, Dr. Levine and Mr. Van Pelt. This was absolutely wonderful, fantastic. All of the words that were used to describe in the chat, this was really, really great, and a great kind of introduction into our institute that we'll be having in May. So much to think about as we head into that work. So again, thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. And I'll put the link to the evaluation in the chat one more time.
Great job.